Billionaire takes his son out for pizza, but when he sees a poor mother sharing a slice with her daughter, he does something unbelievable. The pizza place was one of those spots no one notices when they walk by, small, with worn wooden tables and chairs that wobbled a bit. The floor had a few cracks, and the walls featured old promotion flyers that were no longer valid. But the smell, the aroma of fresh dough coming out of the oven made anyone stop on the sidewalk. Mason King pushed the glass door open and held it for his son to enter. Tyler was 8 years old and still had that smile that believed the world was good. "Dad, it smells way better here than those fancy restaurants," Tyler said, tugging his father's hand toward a table near the window. Mason smiled. Sometimes, all he wanted was this, a simple evening with his son. No meetings, no phone calls, no people wanting something from him, just pizza and conversation. They sat down, and Mason picked up the laminated menu. It was stained at the edges. He was deciding between pepperoni and margarita when Tyler nudged his arm. "Dad, look over there." Mason followed his son's gaze. At the counter, a fair-haired woman was counting coins. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, with a few loose strands falling on her face. She wore a coat that was too thin for the chilly evening temperature. Beside her, a little girl, also fair-haired, with bright blue eyes, gazed intently at the pizzas in the display case. The woman carefully gathered the coins, separating them one by one. Every penny mattered. "One slice of margarita, please," she said to the server, her voice low but firm. "Just one, ma'am." There was a pause. The woman took a deep breath. "Yes." "Just one." The server took the slice, put it on a paper plate and handed it over. The woman thanked him, took the girl's hand, and walked to a small table in the corner, the most discreet table in the pizzeria. Mason looked back at the menu, but something inside him felt uneasy. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He knew what it was like to struggle. He knew what it was like to count coins. It had just been so long that he had forgotten what it was like to have no choice. Grace placed the plate on the table and sat across from her daughter. Maddie looked at the slice of pizza as if it were the most beautiful thing in the world. "Mom, can I start?" Grace smiled. It was a tired smile, but full of love. "Of course, Tara, sweetheart." Maddie picked up the slice with her two small hands and inhaled the scent. She closed her eyes for a second, but before taking the first bite, she stopped. She looked at her mother, she looked at the pizza, and then, with utmost care, she broke the slice in half. It wasn't a perfect half. It was crooked, with melted cheese dripping down one side. But it was the most beautiful gesture Grace had seen in a long time. "Maddie, the bigger one is yours, Mom." The girl pushed the larger piece toward her mother. "You worked all day." Grace felt a lump in her throat. "Honey, you need to eat. You're growing." "I'll eat my half, but you need to eat too." Grace took the larger slice, not because she wanted it, but because she knew that if she refused, Maddie wouldn't eat hers. They ate slowly, very slowly. Every bite was chewed thoughtfully, savored until the end, as if they wanted to make that moment last as long as possible. Maddie chewed carefully, looking at her mother between bites. In the middle of the meal, when there was still a small piece left, she stopped. She held the slice in the air and looked at her mother with those big blue eyes. "Mom, can I have more?" The question pierced Grace's chest like a knife. She felt her heart clench, her breath hitch for a second. She knew the answer was no. She knew the money in her purse barely covered the bus fare for the next few days, but she wasn't going to say that. Grace reached out and pushed a blonde lock of hair away from Maddie's face. "We only have this one slicer." Grace paused. "But we share it with love, okay? And I'm happy just watching you eat." Maddie nodded and continued eating slowly. And it was exactly that silent acceptance, that forced maturity in such a small child, that broke Grace's heart. On the other side of the pizzeria, Tyler couldn't take his eyes off the scene. He saw when the girl split the pizza. He saw the loving way she pushed the bigger slice toward her mom. He saw the hidden sadness in both their smiles. He saw the hunger disguised as patience. Tyler looked at his own plate. There was a whole pepperoni pizza there, just for him. His dad had ordered another one with 4 cheeses. They had soda. Fries were coming, and those two were sharing one slice. Just one. Something stirred inside his chest. Dad. Mason was checking an email on his phone. Dad, look. Tyler tugged his dad's sleeve. Those two, they only have one slice. Mason looked up and finally paid attention. He saw the mother and daughter. He saw the delicate way they shared that slice. He saw the dignity in that simple moment, and something stirred inside him too. Tyler tugged his dad's sleeve again. Dad, can they eat with us? Mason turned and looked into his son's eyes. Tyler had that serious, determined look, but he also had pure empathy. That rare thing the world hadn't taken from him yet. Mason felt immense pride. Yes, son, they can. He put his phone away. Go ahead, invite them. Tyler jumped up quickly, pushing his chair back, but when he took the first step, he stopped. He got nervous. He looked back. What if they don't want to? Mason gave an encouraging smile. Then you respect that. But try. Tyler took a deep breath and walked over to their table. Every step felt heavier. When he got close, Grace and Maddie looked up. Hi, Tyler said, and his voice came out shaky. Hi, Maddie replied softly, wiping her mouth. Tyler looked at Grace first, then at Maddie. He gathered his courage. Me and my dad. We're over there. He pointed. And we ordered too much pizza. Do you want to eat with us? Grace was speechless. She hadn't expected that. Maddie's eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly. Really? Maddie asked, practically jumping out of her chair. Maddie, hold on. Grace held her daughter's hand. She looked at the boy. Oh, that's very kind, but we don't want to bother. You won't bother us, Tyler said quickly. We really want you to. My dad wants you to too. He told me to come and ask. Grace looked toward the other table. There stood a tall, dark-haired man, dressed simply but smartly. He was standing, hands in his pockets, and gave a gentle nod, a silent invitation. Please, Mum, Maddie whispered, squeezing her mother's hand. Grace looked at her daughter. She saw her bright blue eyes, and she couldn't say no. All right, but just for a little while. Maddie smiled so wide it lit up the entire pizzeria. Tyler practically jumped for joy. I'll tell my dad. He ran back. They're coming, Dad. Great. Mason was already moving another table. Help me here. Tyler grabbed a chair and pulled hard. They joined the tables, lined up the chairs, and quickly got everything arranged. Grace and Maddie came over slowly. Grace held her purse tightly in her lap. Maddie held her mother's hand, but she was smiling. Nice to meet you. I'm Mason. He extended his hand. Grace. She shook his hand. Mason's hand was firm, but his touch was gentle. And I'm Tyler. The boy was already sitting next to Maddie. I'm Maddie. The girl spoke so softly, it was barely audible. Mason called the waiter and ordered 2 more large pizzas. Grace tried to refuse. No, seriously, you don't need to. You ate half a slice that you split in 2, Mason said, without being rude. Let us share. It's not charity, it's just being decent people. Grace felt her eyes sting. She couldn't speak. She just nodded. The pizzas arrived. Pepperoni, margarita, chicken, and ranch. The waiter brought soda, juice, fries, and extra napkins. Maddie looked at all of it as if she were in a dream. You can eat, sweetheart, Grace said, and her voice trembled. Maddie took a slice. She bit into it, closed her eyes, chewed slowly. And when she opened her eyes, they shone even brighter. Tyler grabbed a napkin and started drawing with a pen from his pocket. Maddie saw and got curious. "Di, what are you drawing?" "A dinosaur. Do you want to draw too?" Maddie looked at her mother, asking for permission. Grace nodded. Yes. The two children began drawing together. Tyler made a crooked Tyrannosaurus. Maddie laughed and drew a flower next to it. Then they drew a house, then a sun. And then Tyler had an idea. "Let's draw us." He drew 4 stick figures. A taller one, his dad. A little one, him. On the other side, a woman with long hair and a blonde girl. In the middle of them all, he drew a giant pizza. Maddie laughed. It was the first time that evening Grace had heard her daughter laugh so freely. While the children drew, Grace and Mason talked. "Do you live nearby?" Mason asked. "About 20 minutes away by bus." Grace fiddled with the napkin in her hands. "And you?" "On the other side of the city. But Tyler asked to come here. He said he wanted real pizza." Grace smiled. "Your son is very kind. He gets it from his mother." Mason became serious. "She passed away 2 years ago. I'm so sorry. Thank you." Mason looked at his son fondly. "Since then, it's just been him and me. We manage." Grace understood deeply. "Maddie and I too. Just the two of us. Always." They exchanged a look. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. 2 single parents doing the best they could. "What do you do for work?" Mason asked. "I clean houses. I do laundry, whatever comes up." Grace spoke without shame. She spoke with dignity. "And you?" "I own a company. I work in tech. Nothing too exciting." Grace realized he was being modest, but didn't press the issue. The conversation flowed. They talked about their children, about raising a child alone, about the city, about small things. Nothing deep, nothing forced, but it was real. Maddie and Tyler continued drawing, laughing, sharing the last slice. When they finished, Tyler looked at the napkin. "That looks cool." Maddie folded the napkin carefully and put it in her backpack. "Can I keep it?" "Of course, it's ours. It's..." "You can keep it." Maddie hugged the backpack against her chest as if it were a treasure. When the evening ended, everyone stood at the door of the pizzeria. The cold air hit their faces. Grace held Maddie's hand and looked at Mason and Tyler. "Thank you, seriously. You didn't have to, but thank you." "We wanted to," Mason said sincerely. "It was a good night for us too." Maddie let go of her mother's hand and looked at Tyler. "It was really nice meeting you both." Tyler smiled, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "For me too. Maybe we'll see each other again." "I hope so," Maddie said softly. They said goodbye and walked away. Grace held her daughter's hand tightly. Maddie looked back, waving. Mason and Tyler stood there, watching them disappear around the corner. "Dad." Tyler tugged his coat sleeve. "Are we going to see them again?" Mason looked at his son. He didn't know the answer, but something inside him hoped they would. "Maybe, son, life has a way of working out." And that night, 4 people left that pizzeria changed. An invisible thread had been created between them. They didn't know it yet, but that encounter was going to change everything. Because sometimes life puts the right people in the right place, and everything can start with something as simple as sharing a pizza. The apartment was small, so small that you could see the kitchen from the front door. Grace turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open with her shoulder. The wood was swollen from long lack of maintenance. "Watch the step, Maddie." Maddie came in behind her mother, hugging her backpack to her chest, as if guarding a precious secret. Her blue eyes still shone with the memory of the evening. Grace turned on the living room light. The bulb flickered twice before stabilizing. She put her purse on the old sofa and took off her thin coat. The night's chill had seeped into her bones. "Go brush your teeth, honey. It's late." "Okay, Mom." Maddie ran to the bathroom, still clutching her backpack. Grace heard the faucet turn on and the sound of the toothbrush tapping the sink. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment, just breathing. The exhaustion of the entire day weighed on her shoulders like a wet coat. She had cleaned 3 houses today, climbed stairs, scrubbed floors, ironed clothes until her hands ached, and yet she barely had enough money to buy 1 slice of pizza. Grace sighed deeply and went to the kitchen. She opened the drawer of the small table against the wall. The drawer creaked loudly. It had needed oil on the hinges for ages. Inside, a stack of papers, all white, with black letters and red numbers. Bills. Grace picked up the first one. Water bill, overdue. She picked up the second, gas bill. 2 months unpaid. The third one was the worst of all. Electricity bill. With a bold warning at the bottom, disconnection notice. Payment pending for 60 days. Service will be suspended in 5 business days. Grace closed her eyes and gripped the paper tightly. Her hands trembled slightly. She knew this day would come. She had known since last month. When she chose between paying for the electricity or buying food, she had chosen food. Of course she had, but now the bill was there. Real, threatening. 5 days. Mom? Grace opened her eyes quickly and shoved the bills back into the drawer. She closed it with a dry push. She turned and smiled at Maddie, who was standing in the bathroom doorway in her old pajamas, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Did you brush them? Yes. Maddie walked into the small room she shared with her mother. It was so tiny that their single bed took up almost all the space. There was an old dresser in the corner and a thin curtain on the window. Maddie climbed onto the bed and finally opened her backpack. She carefully took out the napkins as if it were an important document. Grace sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter slowly unfold the napkin. The stick figures were still there, 4 figures, a pizza in the middle. Maddie ran her finger over the drawing, tracing the lines Tyler had made. Mom. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Yes, sweetheart. Maddie looked up. And in that look, there was something that broke Grace's heart again. Hope. I really liked playing with Tyler. Do you think I'll ever be able to play with him again? Grace felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected that question. Not tonight. Not after looking at the bills and seeing reality knocking at the door. She wanted to tell the truth. She wanted to say probably not, that this had been a special night, but that people like them didn't cross paths with people like Mason again. That the world didn't work that way. But she couldn't. She couldn't take that hope out of her daughter's eyes. Grace pulled Maddie onto her lap and hugged her. She smelled the cheap shampoo in her hair. She felt the small, thin body pressed against hers. Sometimes life finds a way to bring the right people together. Grace spoke softly, but firmly, as if believing it strongly enough could make it true. Maddie pulled back a little and looked at her mother. Do you think we'll see them again? Grace smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. I don't know, honey. But if it's meant to happen, it will happen. Maddie seemed to accept the answer. She folded the napkin again and put it under her pillow. I'll keep it here. That way I'll dream about them. Grace kissed her daughter's forehead. That's a good idea. Maddie lay down and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. Grace turned off the bedroom light, but the light from the kitchen still faintly illuminated the hallway. Mom! Today was a good day. Grace felt her eyes sting again. She swallowed her tears. It was, sweetheart. It was a very good day. Maddie closed her eyes, still with a small smile on her face. In a few minutes, her breathing became slow and heavy. Asleep. Grace sat on the edge of the bed for a few more minutes, just looking at her daughter, at that tranquil face, still innocent, still able to smile even with so little. She gently ran her hand through Maddie's blonde hair, careful not to wake her. I'll figure it out, Grace whispered to the dark room. I promise I'll figure it out. She slowly got up and left the room. She closed the door almost all the way, leaving just a crack open. She went back to the kitchen. The drawer was still there. The bills were still inside. The disconnection notice was still in bold. Grace pulled out a chair and sat down. She put her head in her hands. 5 days. How was she going to find the money in 5 days? She thought about asking for an advance at work, but she had already asked last month. She thought about borrowing from the neighbor, but the neighbor was also struggling. She thought about selling something, but she had nothing of value to sell. The only thing of value she had was sleeping in the next room. Grace took a deep breath. She wouldn't give up. She had never given up before, and she wasn't going to start now. Tomorrow she would think of something. Tomorrow she would find a way. But today had been a good day. She got up, took a glass of water, and drank it all at once. She turned off the kitchen light and went to the bedroom. She lay down beside Maddie, on top of the blanket so as not to wake her daughter. She looked at the cracked ceiling, at the mold spot in the corner, and then, suddenly, she remembered the way Mason had looked at her, with respect, with kindness. She remembered Maddie's laughter, the sparkle in her eyes, the way Tyler had come over to invite them without fear, without judgment. Maybe life really did find a way to bring the right people together. Maybe. Grace closed her eyes and, for the first time in a long time, fell asleep with a thread of hope in her chest, small, fragile, but still there. The city center was crowded that Saturday morning. People going in and out of shops, street vendors shouting deals, the smell of coffee mixed with hot bread coming from the bakeries. Grace held Maddie's hand as they walked along the sidewalk. They hadn't come to buy anything. She didn't have the money for it. But Maddie had pleaded so much to go out for a while, to see people, to breathe different air, that Grace couldn't deny her. "Look, Mum, there's a window display with toys." Maddie pointed to a store across the street. Her eyes were shining. "We can look from afar, okay?" Grace squeezed her daughter's hand affectionately. "So, okay." They crossed at the crosswalk and stopped in front of the display window. Dolls as cars, building sets. Maddie pressed her nose against the glass, observing every detail. Grace looked at her own reflection in the glass. She looked older than she was, tired. But at least Maddie was smiling. "Tamsment, when I grow up, I'm going to work and buy you toys." Grace felt her chest tighten. "You don't need to buy me anything, honey. Just having you with me is more than enough." Maddie smiled and went back to looking at the toys. It was then that she froze. Her blue eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly. "Mom, it's Tyler." Grace quickly turned her head, following her daughter's gaze. Across the street, near a newsstand, were Mason and Tyler. Mason was flipping through a magazine while Tyler drank a carton of juice. "It's him! It's Tyler!" Maddie almost jumped for joy. Before Grace could say anything, Maddie let go of her hand and ran across the street. "Maddie!" "Be careful." Grace ran after her, her heart pounding. Maddie stopped at the curb, looked both ways, and quickly crossed as soon as the cars stopped. Tyler looked up. When he saw Maddie running toward him, his face completely lit up. "Maddie!" He dropped his juice on the newsstand and ran to meet her. They stopped right in front of each other, smiling like two goofballs. Mason turned and saw Grace crossing the street, breathless. They exchanged a look. Grace gave a shy smile. Mason returned it, putting his hands in his pockets. "Hi," Grace said when she got close, still trying to catch her breath. "Hi." Mason smiled more widely. "So what a coincidence. I didn't even believe it when Maddie saw you two. We were just walking around. Tyler wanted to get out for a bit." Grace nodded. There was that slightly awkward silence, but not uncomfortable, just shy. Meanwhile, Maddie and Tyler were already talking excitedly. "I kept the drawing," Maddie said, practically bouncing. "It's under my pillow. Really, that's cool. I thought about you these past few days. I thought about you too." Tyler looked at his dad, then at Maddie, and had an idea. "Dad, can we go to the park?" Mason looked at Grace, as if asking for permission. "If Maddie and her mom want to..." Maddie tugged at the hem of Grace's shirt. "Mom, please?" "Please." Grace looked at her daughter, then at Mason. He seemed genuine, nothing forced. All right, but just for a little while. The children cheered as if they had won the lottery. The park was 3 blocks away. It was small, but it had large trees, wooden benches, and a simple playground with a slide and swings. As soon as they arrived, Maddie and Tyler ran ahead. Grace and Mason walked behind, silent at first. "Is your weekend quiet?" Mason asked, trying to start a conversation. "It is. We don't do much, but I get to rest a little." Grace looked ahead, seeing Maddie laugh. "And yours?" "The same. I work a lot during the week, so I try to spend time with Tyler. You're a good dad." "It shows." Mason smiled sideways, a little embarrassed. "I try." They got close to a bench and sat down. From there, they could see the children playing in the playground. Maddie climbed the slide. Tyler climbed up behind her. They slid down together, laughing loudly. "Let's play something else," Tyler said, already running toward the lawn. He started picking up leaves from the ground. Maddie imitated him, curious. "What are we going to do?" "Secret leaf exchange." "What's that?" Tyler gathered a bunch of leaves and handed half to Maddie. "We choose the prettiest leaf and give it as a gift to each other. Then we have to say why we chose that one." Maddie smiled widely. "I love that game." They moved away a little, each looking for the perfect leaf. Grace watched it all with a smile on her face. Mason did too. "She seems happy," Mason commented. "She is. It's been a while since I've seen her like this." Mason turned to Grace. He looked at her closely. He saw the way she paid attention to every movement of her daughter. How she smiled every time Maddie laughed. How she seemed to forget her tiredness when she was near the girl. He saw a strong mother, present, a fighter, someone who made the impossible seem possible. "You're doing an incredible job with her," Mason said sincerely. Grace looked away, a little embarrassed. "I do what I can. And it's more than enough. Look how kind she is, polite, happy. That comes from you." Grace felt her eyes sting, but held back the tears. She wouldn't cry there, not in front of him. "Thank you." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence. From the grass, Tyler ran back with a leaf in his hand. "I found mine." Maddie came right behind him, holding a large, yellowish leaf. "Tammy too." They sat on the ground, facing each other. "You go first," Tyler said. Maddie handed the leaf to him. "I chose this one because it's big and it looks like a heart, and you're my friend, so it's like a gift from the heart." Tyler looked at the leaf and smiled. "Thank you very much, Maddie." He handed her his leaf. "Mine has these little spots, see? I thought it was cool, and it shines when the light hits it, like you." Maddie's eyes widened. "Like me?" "Yeah, you're nice, and you seem to shine when you smile." Maddie blushed and hugged the leaf to her chest. Grace and Mason exchanged a look. Both were smiling. After playing for a while, the children returned to the bench. They were sweaty, with rosy cheeks, but happy. Tyler sat down next to his dad, Maddie next to Grace. "Dad, can we see Maddie more often?" Mason looked at Grace. Grace looked at Maddie. The girl had that hopeful look again. "Mom, can we?" Grace took a deep breath. She didn't know if it was a good idea. She didn't know if she should get closer. But looking at her daughter, at how happy she was, "I think so." Maddie smiled so wide it seemed to light up the whole park. Tyler cheered too. "Really? Can we arrange to come here again?" Mason nodded. "Sure. If Grace agrees." Grace looked at him. She saw kindness, respect, nothing invasive. "I agree." The children hugged each other, celebrating softly. Mason took his phone out of his pocket. Do you want to exchange numbers? Then we can coordinate better." Grace hesitated for a second, then she accepted. "All right." They exchanged numbers, Grace typed hers with slightly trembling hands. When she finished, Mason put his phone away and smiled. There. Now it'll be easier. Grace nodded. She felt something strange in her chest, something she couldn't name. Hope, perhaps. Or just the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't completely alone. They stayed at the park for a little longer. The children played until they were tired. When the sun began to get too warm, everyone got up to leave. "It was really good to see you both again," Mason said at the park exit. "For us too." Maddie hugged Tyler before leaving. "See you later, Tyler." "See you later, Maddie." Grace and Maddie walked away. When they turned the corner, Maddie looked up. "Mom, today was a very good day." Grace smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand. "It was sweetheart." It was very good, and for the first time in a long time, Grace felt that maybe, just maybe, life really was bringing the right people together. The following weeks seemed to have changed color. Grace would wake up in the morning and, before even thinking about the bills or work, she would think about the get-togethers they had planned. Mason would text, asking if she and Maddie wanted to hang out on the weekend. She always said yes, and so slowly, the four of them began to become part of each other's routines. On the first Saturday, they went out for ice cream. The ice cream parlor was simple, one of those local neighborhood spots with plastic tables on the sidewalk. Mason ordered 2 large sundaes. Grace tried to share one with Maddie, but he insisted, "One for each, it's fine." Maddie chose strawberry, Tyler chose chocolate. They sat side by side, licking their ice cream and laughing when it dripped onto their hands. "Look, Tyler, mine is melting faster than yours. That's because you're taking too long to lick it." "Watch, like this." Tyler took an exaggerated lick and got chocolate on his nose. Maddie laughed so hard she almost dropped her ice cream. Grace and Mason were sitting at the next table. Grace ate hers slowly, savoring every spoonful. It had been a long time since she'd had ice cream. "You like strawberry too?" Mason asked, pointing to her cup. "I do. I always have. I'm more of a chocolate person, but strawberry is good." They talked about simple things, about the heat of the day, about how well the children were getting along, about nothing and everything at the same time. When they finished, Maddie had ice cream even in her hair. Grace wiped it off with a napkin, laughing. "Or you even managed to get it on your ear, Maddie." "It was an accident." Tyler was also messy. Mason ran his hand through his son's hair, messing it up on purpose. "You too, champ. You look like you took a chocolate bath." The children laughed together. The following week, they went to the town square. It was a larger square, with enormous trees and a fountain in the center. There were pigeons walking on the ground and children running everywhere. Tyler and Maddie ran as soon as they arrived. They chased the pigeons, tried to climb a low tree, sat on the edge of the fountain, and splashed their hands in the water. Grace and Mason walked slowly around it. The sun was beginning to set, and the golden light made everything more beautiful. "Have you always lived here?" Mason asked. "Always. Born and raised in this city." Grace looked up at the sky. "I never left. And you?" "I came from out of town. I moved here about 10 years ago because of work." "And you adapted well?" "Yes, especially after Tyler was born." "This seemed like a good place to raise him." Grace nodded. She was silent for a while, just listening to the sound of the children laughing. "You make it look easy," Mason said suddenly. "What?" "Raising Maddie alone, working, taking care of her, making her smile like that." Grace let out a low, embarrassed laugh. "It's not easy, but I don't have a choice. So I do what needs to be done." Mason looked at her, at the way she kept her posture straight even though she was tired, at the way she paid attention to every detail around her, at her steady gaze, even when life was clearly not gentle with her. "You are strong," he said sincerely. Grace looked away. "No, I'm not. I just do what any mother would do. No. There are many people who would give up. You don't give up. Grace didn't answer, but she felt something warm in her chest, something she couldn't name. A few weeks later, they went for a short walk near a stream that ran through the city. It was a peaceful place. There was a dirt trail, trees on both sides, and the sound of running water. Tyler and Maddie walked ahead, picking up pebbles and throwing them into the water. Look at this one, Maddie. It's perfectly round. And this one is white. I'm keeping it. Maddie slipped the pebble into her pants pocket. Grace and Mason walked behind, talking softly. Tyler talks about you all the time, Grace commented. Seriously. Seriously. The other day, Maddie said she wants a brother just like Tyler. Mason laughed. He talks about you too, especially Maddie. I don't think he's ever had a friend like this. Maddie hasn't either. She's a bit shy at school. Tyler is too energetic. Sometimes I worry that he won't have patience for things. Grace smiled. He does. Look how he is with Maddie. Patient. Kind. Mason looked ahead and saw his son helping Maddie jump over a mud puddle. He held her hand and they jumped together. It's true, Mason said softly. He's a good kid. Because you're a good dad. Mason looked at Grace. She was serious. It wasn't just a compliment, it was recognition. Thank you, he said. They continued walking. The wind rustled the trees, making the leaves dance. The sound of the stream was relaxing. Mason observed Grace as she walked. The tidy way she fixed her hair when the wind messed it up. The way she checked on Maddie every few minutes. The way she smiled whenever her daughter looked back. She was careful, present. She didn't let anything slip by. And even with all the hardship he knew she faced, Grace didn't complain. She didn't place blame on anyone. She just kept going. She is one of the strongest women I've ever met, Mason thought. And it was at that moment he realized he was admiring her. Truly, it wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was pure admiration. The following weekends, they continued meeting up. They went to more parks, walked on different streets, had juice at a small diner, sat on park benches just to watch the world go by. They weren't expensive outings. They weren't sophisticated places, but they were real. And that was more than enough. Maddie and Tyler developed a friendship that seemed years old. They laughed at the same things, invented games together, shared snacks, worried about each other. One day, Maddie tripped and scraped her knee. Tyler stopped instantly. Are you okay? Maddie held back her tears. I am. It just hurt a little. Tyler pulled a band-aid from his pocket. Mason always made sure he carried one. Let me put it on. He applied it carefully. Maddie smiled. Thank you, Tyler. You're welcome. We're friends, right? Friends take care of friends. Grace watched the scene from a distance and felt her heart clench. With emotion, with gratitude, Mason was next to her and had seen it too. They're special, he said. They are, and together they're even more so. Mason looked at Grace, she looked at him, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just a look, a silent acknowledgement that these meetings, these conversations, this connection was becoming something important, something real. The connection between the four grew naturally, without forcing it, without rushing. Tyler started asking when they would see Maddie again before they even said goodbye. Maddie treasured every memory of their time together. Grace waited for Mason's messages with a pleasant anxiety. And Mason began to realize that these moments were the best of his week. It wasn't just about the children anymore. It was about the four of them. A family that was forming without anyone realizing it. Slowly, silently, but inevitably. Grace turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, darker than usual. Come in, Maddie. Maddie entered, hugging her backpack. Grace closed the door behind them and fumbled on the wall for the light switch. Click. Nothing. Click. Click. Nothing. Grace's heart sank in her chest. She knew exactly what had happened. The 5 days had passed, and she hadn't managed to get the money. "Mom, the light won't turn on." Grace swallowed hard, took a deep breath. She needed to stay calm. She couldn't let Maddie sense her despair. "It must be an outage on the street, honey." "It happens sometimes." Grace went to the window and opened the curtain. The light from the street lamps illuminated the apartment slightly. She could see the shadows of the furniture. Maddie went to the other window, the one in the bedroom. She looked outside for a few seconds. Then she turned around. "Mom, it's only our house that's dark." Grace closed her eyes for a second. Of course Maddie would notice. She always noticed everything. "Oh, is it?" Grace tried to sound surprised. "That's strange." She went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. There was still a little light inside, coming from the internal battery, but it would soon go out too. She needed to be quick. She took out the leftover bread, a piece of cheese, 2 apples. She closed the refrigerator before it got too warm. Maddie appeared in the kitchen doorway, hugging her backpack. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Grace turned and smiled. It wasn't a genuine smile, but it was the best she could offer at the moment. "You know what we're going to do? We're going to have a special dinner." "Special how?" Grace opened the drawer and took out 2 small candles she kept for emergencies. She found a box of matches at the back. "By candlelight, just like in the movies." Maddie's eyes widened. "Really? Really? It'll be romantic. Like a fancy dinner." Grace lit the 2 candles and placed one on the kitchen table and the other on the counter. The faint yellow light illuminated the room. Shadows danced on the walls. Maddie dropped her backpack and approached the table. "It looks pretty." "It does, doesn't it?" Grace sliced the bread, divided the cheese, washed the apples in the sink. At least the water still worked. She put everything on a plate and brought it to the table. They sat down, facing each other. The candlelight illuminated Maddie's small face, making her blue eyes shine even brighter. "Enjoy your meal," Grace said, trying to keep her tone light. "Enjoy your meal, Mom." They ate slowly. There wasn't much, but Grace made sure to give the larger share to Maddie. She herself ate only a small piece of bread and half an apple. "Mom, aren't you going to eat more?" "I'm full, honey. You eat." Maddie ate without complaining. As she chewed, she kept looking at the candle flame. She seemed mesmerized. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Grace commented. "It is." "It looks like magic." Grace smiled. At least Maddie wasn't scared, not yet. After they finished, Grace collected the plates and left them in the sink. She would wash them the next day when there was more natural light. "Let's brush our teeth and go to sleep, okay?" "Okay." Grace took one of the candles and carried it to the bathroom. Maddie brushed her teeth quickly. Their shadows in the mirror looked gigantic. Then they went to the bedroom. Grace placed the candle on the dresser, away from the curtain. Maddie changed her clothes and put on her pajamas. "Mom, how long will the light be like this?" Grace sat on the bed and pulled Maddie close. "I don't know, honey, but we'll be fine." "We always are." Maddie nodded, but Grace saw the worry in her eyes. They lay down. Grace pulled the blanket up and covered both of them. The candle was still lit, faintly illuminating the room. They were silent for a few minutes. Grace looked at the ceiling, trying to think of how she would solve this. How long would it take to raise the money? A week? 2? And in the meantime, how would they live without light? "Mom," Maddie's voice was a whisper. "Yes?" "I'm afraid of the dark." Grace turned onto her side and looked at her daughter. Maddie's eyes were wide open, fixed on the candle. "I know, sweetheart. What if the candle goes out?" Grace reached out and hugged Maddie tight. She pulled her close, resting her chin on the girl's head. "I'm here. It doesn't matter if the candle goes out or not. I'll be here with you the whole time. Promise? I promise." Maddie snuggled into her mother's chest. Grace felt the small body trembling slightly. "You can sleep with me tonight. We'll stay close." "Okay." Grace gently stroked Maddie's blonde hair. Slowly, she felt her daughter's breathing begin to slow down. "Mom, I love you." Grace felt her eyes sting. A tear rolled down her face, but she held back the rest. "I love you too, my darling, more than anything." A few minutes later, Maddie fell asleep. Grace stayed awake, looking at the candle. The flame trembled with the breeze coming through the crack in the window. The night was hard. The reality was heavy. But there, in that moment, with Maddie in her arms, Grace felt something that went beyond the pain. Love. A love so great it hurt. A love that made her want to continue, even when everything seemed impossible. Grace kissed Maddie's forehead and closed her eyes. The candle continued to burn for a few more minutes, until the wax ran out. The flame trembled one last time and went out. The room became completely dark, but Grace didn't move. She stayed hugged to her daughter, protecting her from the world, from the cold, from the fear. Because in the end, that's what she had. She didn't have money. She didn't have light. She didn't have luxury. But she had Maddie. And as long as she had her, she would keep fighting. The night was long. Grace barely slept. She lay thinking, planning, trying to find a solution. But even in the midst of all that difficulty, one thing she knew for sure: she would find a way. She always did. And this time wouldn't be any different. For Maddie. For the two of them. Because the love she felt for her daughter was greater than any overdue bill, greater than any darkness, and that no one could disconnect. The park was crowded that Sunday. Children running, dogs barking, the sound of laughter mixed with bird songs. It was a beautiful day. Sunny. The kind of day that should make anyone feel good. But Grace wasn't feeling good. She was sitting on a bench, watching Maddie play with Tyler on the slide. The two children laughed, chased each other, seeming to have no worries in the world. Grace wished she could feel that lightness, but she couldn't. The electricity had been cut off 3 days ago. 3 nights sleeping in the dark. 3 mornings waking up without knowing how she was going to solve it. She had tried to ask for an advance at work again. They refused. She had tried to get an extra job cleaning a friend's house. The woman said she would think about it and never called back. The money didn't appear, and the bill only grew with interest. Grace rubbed her face with her hands. She was exhausted, not just physically, mentally too. "Grace." She looked up quickly. Mason was standing in front of her, holding 2 cups of juice. "Brought one for you. It was hot. I thought you'd like it." He handed her the cup. Grace took it, trying to smile. "Thank you." Mason sat next to her on the bench. He took a sip of juice and watched the children for a few seconds. Then he turned to Grace. "Are you okay?" Grace nodded too quickly. "I am, just tired." Mason didn't answer right away. He observed her, the way she held the cup with both hands, the way she avoided looking at him, the way her shoulders seemed more slumped than usual. Grace." She turned to him, forcing a smile. "Seriously, Mason, I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Grace looked away. She looked at the ground, at the cup, anywhere but his eyes. "It's just exhaustion, hard week." Mason didn't push right away. He knew that kind of answer. It was the answer of someone who was used to carrying everything alone. Of someone who didn't know how to ask for help. They were silent for a few minutes. The children shouted happily in the distance, oblivious to everything. But then Grace sighed, and it was a heavy sigh, laden. "Mason." He turned to her. "Tell me." Grace opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words were caught in her throat, as if afraid to come out. I don't know if I should say this. You can say it, I'm here. Grace bit her lip. She felt her eyes sting. She tried to hold it back, but couldn't. A tear rolled down. They cut off our electricity. Her voice came out shaky, broken. Mason became serious. He didn't say anything. He just waited for her to continue. It's been 3 days. I couldn't pay the bill. I tried, but I couldn't. Another tear, then another. And Maddie is afraid of the dark. She tries not to show it, but I know, I see it, and I can't do anything. Grace's voice failed. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide the tears. I feel like a terrible mother. I work all day. I do everything I can. And yet, it's still not enough. Mason felt his chest clench. He saw the pain there, the shame, the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting alone for too long. He slowly reached out and touched her shoulder. Grace, look at me. She took a moment but lifted her face. Her eyes were red, wet. You are not a terrible mother, but you're not failing. Mason's voice was firm but gentle. You're fighting alone, and that is different. Grace shook her head, still not believing him. I should be able to do it. Other people manage. Other people have help. They have family. They have a support network. Mason held her gaze. You are doing everything alone. And yet look at Maddie. He pointed to the girl who was laughing with Tyler. She is happy. She is polite. She is kind. That comes from you, Grace. You may not have the money to pay the electricity bill, but you've given her something much more important. What? Love, security, presence. Grace felt more tears stream down. But this time, they weren't just tears of pain. They were also tears of relief, of being seen, of being heard. I just wanted to give her more. You give what you can, and what you give is already a lot. Grace wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to vent to you like that. Don't apologize. Mason leaned forward a little. You don't have to carry everything alone. Grace looked at him. She saw sincerity there. She saw genuine concern. I don't know how to do it differently. It's always been this way. But it doesn't have to stay that way. There was a pause. Mason took a deep breath. He knew he needed to speak carefully. He didn't want her to feel invaded. He didn't want her to think he was offering charity. Grace, let me help you. Her eyes widened. Mason, no, it's not charity. It's not pity. He spoke slowly, choosing every word. It's friendship. It's concern. It's wanting to see you well. Grace shook her head. You've already done so much. The get-togethers, the pizzas, the ice cream, you've already helped enough. That wasn't help. That was spending time together. That was sharing moments. Mason looked into her eyes. But now I'm talking about something else. Let me pay that electricity bill, at least that. No, Mason. I can't accept. Why? Because I don't want to owe anyone anything. I don't want... You won't owe anything. His voice was soft, but firm. I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want you and Maddie to be okay. Grace felt her throat tighten again. She wanted to say no. She wanted to keep her pride intact. But at the same time, she was so tired of fighting alone. I don't know, Mason. You don't have to decide now. He leaned back on the bench. Think about it. And when you want to talk about it, I'm here. Grace remained silent. She looked at her own hands, then at the children, then at the sky. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And Mason understood that this was already a start. They sat there for a few more minutes. They didn't talk much, but being next to each other seemed to say more than any words. Grace felt exposed, vulnerable, but also relieved. For the first time in a long time, she had talked about the burden she carried, and the person on the other side hadn't judged, hadn't turned their back, had stayed. Tyler and Maddie came running up to them, sweaty and happy. "Dad, can we get a popsicle?" Mason smiled. "Sure, let's go." Maddie looked at her mother. "Mom, are you coming?" Grace quickly wiped her face and smiled. "I am, honey." They went to the popsicle cart that was at the park entrance. The children chose their flavors and walked around licking them. Grace and Mason walked side by side in comfortable silence. Before they said goodbye, Mason lightly touched her arm. "Think about what I said, okay?" Grace nodded. "I will." And she really would. Because for the first time, she wasn't alone in the fight. And that changed everything. The park was especially beautiful that Saturday afternoon. The sun filtered through the trees, creating dancing shadows on the ground covered with dry leaves. Tyler and Maddie were sitting on the grass, concentrating on a tower of twigs that kept collapsing every 3 pieces they put on. "No, wait. Put this thinner one on first," Tyler instructed, sticking his tongue out in concentration. Maddie carefully placed the twig, holding her breath. The tower stood for exactly 2 seconds before collapsing completely. The two burst into loud, genuine laughter. Grace and Mason watched from a distance, sitting on the bench where they always sat. She drank water from an old bottle she had refilled 3 times that afternoon. He glanced at his phone sometimes, but without really paying attention to the notifications. Tyler suddenly got up, shaking the grass off his jeans. He ran to his dad with shining eyes. "Dad!" "Hi, champ, tired of playing?" "No, I had an idea." Mason put his phone away and smiled. "What idea?" Tyler looked at Maddie, who had walked up behind him. Then he looked at his dad, then at Grace. He was clearly excited about something. "Can we invite Maddie to come over to our house so she can see my toy room? I have a lot of cool stuff she would like." Mason blinked, surprised by the direct question. He looked at Grace, who also seemed to have been caught off guard. She held the bottle with both hands, unsure of how to answer. Well, if Maddie and her mom want to, of course. I want to." Maddie had stepped forward, her blue eyes shining brightly. "Mom, can I go?" Grace didn't know what to say. She looked at Mason, trying to figure out if the invitation was truly sincere or just politeness because of his son's excitement. Mason noticed her hesitation. He got up from the bench and spoke in a more serious, more sincere tone. "Grace, if you're comfortable with it, you two are very welcome at my house." He looked into her eyes. No pressure at all. "But it would really be nice to have you both there." Grace looked down at Maddie. The girl was practically jumping in place, her small hands clasped as if making a silent prayer. "Please, Mom, please." Grace took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to refuse. She didn't want to intrude on his personal space. She didn't want to seem opportunistic or create expectations. But another part, the part that saw her daughter completely happy for the first time in a long time, couldn't say no. "All right, we'll go." Maddie screamed with joy and jumped up, hugging Tyler tightly. The two began talking at once about what they would play, what games they had, what they would do. Mason smiled at Grace, and she returned it with a shy smile. My car is parked nearby in the lot. I can give you a ride." "Are you sure? We can take the bus. You don't need to." "Grace," Mason interrupted her gently, but firmly. "I'm sure. It's no trouble at all." Mason's car was a grey sedan, simple but clean and well-maintained. Nothing extravagant or flashy. Tyler and Maddie went straight to the back seat, immediately starting an animated conversation about dinosaurs. Grace sat in the front, looking out the window and trying to control the butterflies in her stomach. They drove out of the city center and headed toward a more distant neighborhood. The streets gradually became wider, the houses larger and more spaced out, the gardens better maintained and more colorful. Grace felt a slight pang in her chest. This wasn't the kind of place she was used to being in, at least not as a visitor, only when she went to work. After about 15 minutes in the car, Mason turned onto a tree-lined street and parked in front of a 2-story house. It wasn't an extravagant mansion, but it was beautiful and comfortable. It had a front garden with well-cared-for colorful flowers, a porch with wooden chairs and cushions, and a light blue front door. "We're here," Mason announced, turning off the engine. The children jumped out, already excited. Grace got out slowly, adjusting her purse on her shoulder and observing the house carefully. It was welcoming. It had that air of a real home, not just a beautiful building. Mason opened the front door with his key and everyone entered. The interior was simple, but very well decorated. There was a spacious living room with large and comfortable sofas, a large wooden bookshelf filled with books and various decorations, framed photos on the walls showing Tyler at various ages. "Make yourselves at home," Mason said, placing the keys on a small table near the door. Tyler was already pulling Maddie by the hand. "Come on, my room is upstairs." "I'll show you everything." The two ran up the stairs, their quick footsteps echoing through the house. Their laughter filled the air. Grace stood in the middle of the living room, feeling a bit lost. She didn't know where to sit, where to stand, what to do with her hands. She gripped the strap of her purse tightly. "Relax." Mason appeared beside her with a calm smile. "You can sit wherever you like. Would you like something to drink? Water, juice, coffee?" "Water is great." Grace carefully sat down on the sofa, as if afraid to mess anything up. She sank slightly into the upholstery. It was extremely soft and comfortable. Mason went to the kitchen and quickly returned with 2 tall glasses of cold water. "No, thank you." He sat down beside her, but left a respectful space between them, not invading her personal area. "Tyler is very happy you came. He couldn't stop talking about it on the way here." "Maddie, too. She barely slept last night. She was so excited." Mason chuckled softly. "They're so good for each other." It's rare to see such a pure friendship. It's true. They were silent for a few seconds. It wasn't an odd or uncomfortable silence. It was just calm, natural. From upstairs came loud laughter and the sounds of toys being dragged across the floor, boxes being opened, and animated voices talking at the same time. Grace smiled as she listened to it. "Your son has a lot of energy. Too much. Sometimes I don't know where he gets all that energy." Grace took a sip of water and took the opportunity to look around more carefully. The living room was bright and airy, with lots of natural light coming in through the large windows. There was a hallway that led to the kitchen. A beautifully crafted wooden staircase went up to the 2nd floor. Something about all of it seemed strangely familiar. She frowned slightly, trying to pinpoint where that unsettling feeling came from, but she couldn't identify it. She shook her head and dismissed it. It was probably just her imagination. "The house is very beautiful," Grace commented, turning her attention back to Mason. "Thank you. I bought it about 8 years ago, right after Tyler was born. I needed something bigger, with space for him to grow and play." You can tell there's love here. It's not just magazine decor. "It's a real home." Mason looked around too, as if seeing the house through her eyes for the first time. "I tried to make a place where he would feel safe and happy after his mother died. I wanted him to at least have that, a place just for him." Grace nodded, deeply understanding that feeling. "You succeeded. You can feel it in the air." They talked for a longer time. About light, everyday things, about work, about the challenges of the city, about the children and their funny habits. The conversation flowed naturally, effortlessly, without forced silences. Grace caught herself laughing out loud at a story Mason told about Tyler trying to make pancakes by himself one Sunday morning and ending up covering the entire kitchen in flour and broken eggs. He said he wanted to make me a surprise breakfast for Father's Day. The real surprise was the monumental mess. Grace laughed, shaking her head. Maddie tried to do something similar once. She wanted to bake a birthday cake for me. She ended up breaking 3 eggs directly onto the kitchen floor and spilling milk all over the refrigerator. At least they try, right? They really do. After a while of talking, Mason looked at the clock on the wall. Look, it's almost time for dinner. Do you want to stay? I can make something simple, nothing too elaborate. Grace hesitated, biting her lip. I don't want to be a bother, Mason. You've already done so much. It's not trouble. Mason stood up and looked at her sincerely. It's just pasta with sauce, nothing fancy, but it would be really nice to have company at the table. It's been a while since I have... Grace looked toward the stairs, from which the children's contagious laughter still came. She thought about Maddie, about how happy she was, about how long it had been since she had seen her daughter like this. All right, we'll stay. Mason smiled widely, and Grace noticed how that smile lit up his face. Great. I'll start preparing it then. He went to the kitchen and started taking pots out of the cupboard. Grace offered to help, but he gently refused, saying she was the guest and deserved to rest. While waiting, Grace decided to go upstairs to see how the children were doing. She slowly climbed the stairs, running her hand along the wooden railing. Tyler's room was the second one on the right. The door was open. It was a large, tidy room, with a single bed with superhero sheets, an immense bookcase full of children's books and all kinds of toys, and a colorful, soft rug on the floor. Maddie and Tyler were sitting on the rug, putting together a giant 1,000-piece puzzle. This piece goes here, look. It has the same pattern, Tyler was saying, fitting a piece in. Oh, it does, it's perfect. Grace smiled broadly. She watched for a few minutes, her heart warm, before going back downstairs. Dinner was ready quickly. Mason had made rotini pasta with homemade tomato and basil sauce, simple but fragrant. There was also toasted Italian bread with garlic and butter, and fresh orange juice. He called the children and they all sat down at the kitchen table. Tyler and Maddie ate fast, talking between mouthfuls about the puzzle they were assembling. Grace and Mason ate more slowly, observing the scene with smiles on their faces. The atmosphere was familiar, almost too natural. As if this had happened 1,000 times before. After dinner, Tyler eagerly asked to show some drawings he had done in his school art class. He said he had earned a golden star from his teacher. They're in the living room, in a blue folder, Mason explained, getting up to collect the dishes. Grace, could you get it for him? It's on the large bookshelf, I think on the second shelf. Of course. Grace got up and walked to the living room. She went to the bookshelf, scanning the shelves for the blue folder. But when she passed the stairs on the way, something made her stop completely. She looked at the dark wooden steps, at the railing carved with delicate details, at the narrow corridor that led to the upstairs bedrooms. Her heart began to beat faster, harder. That. She recognized that from somewhere. Grace turned slowly, almost afraid, and looked at the tall window at the end of the hallway. The large window with colored stained glass borders, blue, red, yellow. She had seen that window before. She was absolutely sure. She walked over to it, as if being pulled by an invisible thread. She touched the wooden wall with trembling fingertips. It was smooth, varnished, but the texture beneath the varnish. The texture was exactly as she remembered from so long ago. The memory came like a violent wave, breaking down all barriers. She was 5 years old, maybe 6. She was sitting right in this hallway, with an old worn-out doll on her lap, waiting for her mother to finish cleaning the bedrooms. Stay quiet right there, Grace. Mommy will be done soon, and then we'll leave. Okay? Grace covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes instantly filling with tears. Past and present merged in a whirlwind of emotions. She turned and looked at the stairs again. She remembered going up and down those steps dozens of times, while her mother cleaned the rooms, changed sheets, mopped the floor. She remembered sitting in the kitchen, this very kitchen, eating chocolate cookies that the former lady of the house would give her with a kind smile. Grace? She spun around abruptly. Mason was standing at the entrance to the living room, a worried expression on his face. Are you all right? Did something happen? Grace tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. She shook her head, still trying to process everything. The tears began to flow. This house. Her voice was shaky, broken. This house is familiar to me. Mason frowned, confused. But what do you mean? Have you been here before? Grace looked at him with red, wet eyes. She pointed to the hallway, to the stairs, to the details around them that only she seemed to recognize. My mother. She took a deep breath, trying to control her crying. My mother worked here. A heavy, dense silence fell over the room. Only the clock on the wall could be heard. What? My mother was a cleaner. She worked here when I was very little. I came with her. I used to wait there. Grace pointed to the hallway, sitting right there on the floor, playing with my doll. Mason stood completely still. The information took time to process in his brain. Are you absolutely sure about this? Grace nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I remember this window with the colored stained glass. I remember this railing. I used to touch it every time. I remember sitting in the kitchen. The lady who lived here used to give me chocolate cookies. Mason ran his hand through his hair, clearly in shock. I had no idea. I bought the house from a family who lived here before. The family who moved out 8 years ago. The Peterson family, Grace finished, her voice still trembling. Mr. Peterson was stern, but Mrs. Peterson was very kind. She always had a smile for me. She always gave me cookies and juice. Mason had to sit down on the sofa, still processing, trying to understand. This is completely unbelievable. Grace also sat down, her legs too weak to stand. She sat in the armchair opposite him. I hadn't recognized it before. It's been so long, more than 20 years, and I was so small, just a child. But now, seeing everything again, being inside here, the memories came back all at once. They fell into absolute silence. The weight of that revelation hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Mason looked at her with an expression that mixed shock, disbelief, and something else. So our paths, they crossed before, a long time ago. Grace nodded, still wiping her tears. They crossed. In this very house. And now, after so many years, they've crossed again. Grace felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was something else. It was as if the universe had conspired for that moment to happen. Something bigger that neither of them could name or fully understand. The children came running into the living room at that moment, completely oblivious to all the tension and emotion. Mom, Dad, can we watch a movie now? Grace quickly wiped her face, trying to hide the fact that she had been crying. She forced a smile. You can, honey. Of course you can. Tyler and Maddie threw themselves onto the living room rug, in front of the TV. Mason got up, being still a little dizzy, and put on a children's movie for them, something with talking animals and adventure. He went back to the sofa and sat next to Grace this time, closer. They stayed there, side by side, watching the children laugh loudly at the illuminated screen, but both their minds were very, very far from there. Thinking about the statistical impossibility of it all, about the house that had been a silent witness to the past, about Grace's mother who had worked there for years, about the distant past that was now inexplicably connected to the present. And about the surprising fact that, Out of all the people in the world, all the pizzerias, all the parks, all the possible places, they had found each other again, not by chance, not by coincidence, but by something much greater, something neither of them could name yet. But that was pulsing there in the space between them, real, inevitable, destined. The days following the emotional dinner were different for Mason. He couldn't stop thinking about Grace, the way she had recognized the house, the emotion on her face when she remembered her mother working there, the strength she showed to keep fighting alone. But what moved him most was knowing that Grace was facing everything without help, and that he could do something real about it, not out of pity. It was never that, but because she deserved it, because she was capable, because he trusted her. It was on a Thursday afternoon that he finally decided. He took out his phone and called Grace. "Hi, Mason," she answered, her voice a little surprised. "Hi, are you free on Saturday? I wanted to talk to you about something important." Grace was silent for a second. "Is everything okay?" "It is. It's something good, actually." "Oh, okay. Can we meet at the park?" "Even better if you and Maddie come here to the house. The children can play and we can talk calmly." Grace hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to bother." "You're never a bother." "Please, come." "Okay, we'll come." When Saturday arrived, Grace was nervous. She didn't know what Mason wanted to talk about, but the seriousness in his voice had left her uneasy. She dressed Maddie carefully and took the bus to his house. Tyler opened the door before they even knocked. "Maddie, come on, I set up a giant racetrack in my room." The children ran upstairs. Grace entered. Mason was in the living room with 2 cups of coffee already prepared. "Hi," he said with a smile. "Hi." They sat down. Grace held the cup with both hands, nervous. Mason took a deep breath. "Grace, I spent the whole week thinking about you, about Maddie, about everything." He paused, "And I realized that I want to help you." "But in the right way." Grace frowned. "Mason, Grace, we already talked about this. I can't accept money. Oh, it's not money, it's a job." Grace blinked, confused. "How?" "I need an executive assistant at the company, someone to organize the schedule, handle documents, answer calls, help with meetings." Mason looked at her sincerely. "And I thought of you." Grace was in absolute silence. "Mason, I've never worked in an office. I don't have experience with that. I clean houses. You are organized, responsible, punctual. You handle everything alone and still keep Maddie happy and well cared for." He leaned forward a little. "That is more important than experience. I'll teach you the rest." Grace shook her head, her eyes starting to water. "I don't know if I can do it. I know you can. And I'll give you full training. You'll have time to learn. But the salary, it's a good one. Enough for you to pay the bills, buy food, and still have some left over. There's health insurance for you and Maddie, too." Grace covered her mouth with her hand. The tears began to fall. "Mason, this is too much. It feels like charity." "It's not charity, Grace." He spoke with complete sincerity. "It's because I trust you, because I see how hard you work, how much you fight. And because I know you'll be great at it." Grace tried to speak, but her voice failed. "I'm embarrassed about not knowing how. Everyone starts without knowing. I started knowing nothing about business, and you will learn." She looked at him, and Mason saw something in her eyes he had never seen before, real hope. "You really think I can do it?" "I'm absolutely certain." Grace took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there was a decision there. "I accept." Mason smiled in relief. "Seriously? Seriously? I will do my best." "I know you will." Grace cried a little more, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of feeling for the first time in years that she had a real chance to change her life. Mason extended his hand. "Welcome to the team." Grace shook it, smiling through her tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You deserve this." The following Monday was Grace's first day. She woke up earlier, showered, put on the most presentable outfit she had, black pants and a white shirt, and tied her hair in a low bun. Maddie was excited. "Mom, you look so pretty." Grace smiled, nervous. "Thank you, honey." After dropping Maddie off at school, she took the bus to the office. The building was modern, with mirrored glass. Grace went inside, her heart pounding. The receptionist greeted her with a smile. "You must be Grace. Mr. King is already waiting. 5th floor." Grace went up in the elevator. Mason was waiting. "Ready?" "I think so." He led her to an office next to his. It had an organized desk, computer, phone, and bookshelves. "This is your space. Today I'll show you everything carefully." And that's exactly what he did. Mason spent the entire morning teaching how to use the system, how to organize the schedule, how to answer calls professionally, how to file documents. Grace paid attention to every detail. She took notes. She asked questions when she didn't understand, and she learned quickly, very quickly. By the end of the first week, Grace was already handling most tasks alone. "You're doing very well," Mason said one Friday. Grace smiled shyly. "Thank you. I'm trying." "You're succeeding." Days turned into weeks. Grace worked every day, picked up Maddie from school in the afternoon, and returned home tired but happy. For the first time, she had a stable salary. She paid the electricity bill. She bought food without counting coins. She even bought new clothes for Maddie. And more than that, she was learning, growing, feeling capable. Mason admired her more every day. He saw her dedication, how she never complained, how she always solved problems, how she smiled even on difficult days. And without realizing it, he began to notice other things. The way she tied her hair up when she was concentrating, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, the way she smiled when he entered the room. The two spent the whole day together. The connection grew naturally. In the morning, Grace would bring him coffee without him asking. "Thank you," he would always say. "You're welcome," and their eyes would meet for a second longer than necessary. In the afternoon, when Mason needed to review documents, he would call Grace. They sat side by side, reading, discussing, deciding together. And sometimes their hands would touch when reaching for the same paper. A brief touch, but one that left them both momentarily paralyzed. At night, when the office was empty, the conversations became more intimate. "How was Maddie's day?" Mason would ask. "Great. She got a perfect score in math." "She takes after you. Smart." Grace would smile, blushing. "And Tyler?" "Good. But he asked about you both again today. I think he misses you." "Maddie too." She talks about him every day. They talked about their children, about work, about life, and little by little they opened up more. Grace talked about her mother, who had died of cancer, about how she was left alone, about Maddie's father, who left before she was born. Mason talked about his wife and about how hard it was to lose her, about how lost he felt, about how Tyler was his reason to continue. They shared pain, and by doing so, they divided the burden. One night, late, Grace was organizing files. Mason appeared at the door. "Still here?" She looked up and smiled. "Almost finished. You can leave it for tomorrow." "I know, but I want to finish." Mason stayed there, watching her work. Her hair had escaped the bun. She looked tired but happy. "Grace." "Thank you." She stopped and looked, confused. "For what?" "For being here, for doing this so well, for being you." Grace felt her face warm. She looked away. "I should be thanking you. You changed my life. You changed mine too." The silence that fell was different, heavy, full of unspoken things. Grace went back to typing, her heart racing. Mason stayed a few more seconds before leaving, but those words echoed in both their minds all night long. Months passed. The bond between Grace and Mason deepened naturally, slowly but inevitably. They knew each other's tastes, their fears, their dreams. Grace knew Mason liked his coffee black, that he got annoyed when meetings were delayed, that he smiled every time Tyler called. Mason knew Grace loved afternoon tea, that she got nervous when she had to present something, that she lit up every time she talked about Maddie. They understood each other, and without realizing it, they were becoming essential to each other. It wasn't just work, it was complicity, trust. Something neither of them was ready to name yet, but it was there, growing, inevitable, real, and they both knew, deep down, that this was no longer just about work, it was about them. 6 months had passed since Grace started working with Mason. 6 months of learning, growth, and profound changes. Life had completely turned upside down, but this time, in the right direction. It was on a Friday afternoon that Mason appeared in her office with a smile on his face. "Grace, what are you and Maddie doing tomorrow night?" She looked up from her computer. "Nothing special, why? I wanted to invite you both to dinner at my house. But this time, we'll make the food together, all of us." Grace smiled. "Make food together?" "Yeah, homemade pizza. From scratch, dough, sauce, toppings, everything." Mason leaned against the doorframe. Tyler is already excited. He wants Maddie to come. Maddie is going to love that idea. So, is it a plan? It's a plan. On Saturday evening, Grace and Maddie arrived at Mason's house with a bag full of ingredients they had bought together at the supermarket. Maddie was beaming, jumping with excitement. Tyler ran to open the door. "You're here, come." "My dad already set everything out in the kitchen." The children ran inside. Grace entered more slowly, taking off her coat. Mason appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron tied around his waist. "Welcome. Ready to get your hands dirty? Literally," Grace laughed. "Completely ready." The kitchen turned into utter chaos, but the good kind. Mason taught everyone how to make the dough. Maddie and Tyler got covered in flour. Grace tried to make the pizza round and it came out completely crooked. Mason laughed so hard he almost let the sauce burn. "It's not crooked, it's rustic," Grace defended, laughing too. "Sure, rustic. We'll go with that version." Tyler spread cheese with his hands. Maddie arranged tomato slices into a flower pattern. Grace seasoned it with fresh basil. Mason finished with olive oil. They put it in the oven and waited, all sitting on the kitchen floor, talking and laughing. When the pizza was ready, the smell filled the entire house. They ate in the living room, sitting on the rug, watching an animated movie the children chose. The pizza was delicious, imperfect but made with love. After dinner, Tyler and Maddie were exhausted. They collapsed onto the sofa, leaning on each other, and within minutes they were fast asleep. Grace looked at them and felt her chest clench with emotion. They look like siblings. Mason looked too and smiled. "They really do." He slowly got up. "Wait here. I have something to show you." Grace stayed seated, curious. Mason went up to the second floor and returned a few minutes later, holding something in his hands. It was a framed picture, small, simple, with a light wooden frame. He sat down next to her on the sofa and turned the picture around. Inside, protected by glass, was the napkin from the pizzeria. The napkin with the 4 stick figures and the pizza in the middle. The drawing Tyler and Maddie had made together on the first night they met. Grace covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes instantly filling with tears. "Mason." "I kept it." He looked at the frame fondly. "I found it in Tyler's jacket pocket a few days later." He had taken it back when Maddie wasn't looking, because he wanted to keep it too. Mason smiled. "I had it framed, because this is where everything started." Grace took the frame with trembling hands. She ran her fingers over the glass, tracing the stick figures drawn with pen. "I can't believe you kept this. How could I not keep it? It was the beginning of everything. Mason looked at her. From the moment Tyler saw you in that pizzeria, something changed. For him, for me, for us. Grace tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. She could only cry. I never thought one day I'd be able to call this place home. She looked around at the illuminated, cozy house. I never thought I would have this feeling of belonging. Mason took her hand. He held it firmly but gently. You're already part of our family, Grace. She looked at him, tears streaming freely. We are. You are. You and Maddie. You are part of this place, this house, this life. He squeezed her hand a little tighter. You are part of me and Tyler. Grace sobbed and put the frame aside to hug Mason. He hugged her back hard, tight, as if he wanted to protect her from everything that had hurt in the past. They stayed like that for long minutes, just hugging, in silence, letting the weight of everything they had been through drain away. When they separated, Grace wiped her face. Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for giving me a chance, for... She looked at the children sleeping, for giving Maddie a family. Thank you for accepting, for trusting, for letting us into your lives. Mason picked up the frame again and stood up. He went to the living room walls where there was a shelf with photos of Tyler. He hung the frame right in the center. There. Now it's officially part of the house. Grace looked at the picture on the wall and felt something click inside her, as if a piece that had always been missing had finally found its place. They went back to the sofa. They sat side by side, watching the children sleeping peacefully. Tyler had his arm draped over Maddie, as if protecting her. Maddie had her head resting on his shoulder. They'll be fine, Mason said softly. They will, because now they have each other. Mason turned to Grace. And so do we. She looked at him, and in that look there was everything: gratitude, trust, admiration, and something more. Something neither of them had the courage to name yet, but that pulsed there in the space between them. Love. Grace rested her head on Mason's shoulder. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. And they stayed like that, the four of them together. The children sleeping on the sofa, breathing slowly. Grace and Mason embracing, finally at peace. The house illuminated and warm, full of life and possibilities. And on the wall, the framed napkin, silent witness to where it all began. A shared slice of pizza, a gesture of kindness, an unexpected invitation. And now, months later, there they were. A new family, not formed by blood or by papers, but by choice, by love, by belonging. Grace closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Home, with the right people, at the right time. And it had all started with something so simple. A pizza, a napkin, and the certainty that sometimes life puts the right people in the right place. And when that happens, you just need to have the courage to accept it, to open your heart and let love in.